called a split-run edition, which means that they would have American editorial content and Canadian advertising, and that was a big threat to the Canadian magazine industry. And so the split-run magazines had been made more or less illegal in Canada because such a high tariff was, there was a high tariff put on magazines that crossed the border if they were mainly American content. And Time Warner figured out, well, they could do Sports Illustrated Canada without worrying about the tariff by sending by satellite to Richmond Hill and having it printed in Richmond Hill. And Canada then put a big tax on the advertising in such a split-run magazine. The US took Canada to court in Geneva and won the case. And in winning the case, the WTO dispute settlement body also ruled that policies that had been in place 30 or 40 years, such as one example is the postal subsidy that Canadian magazines got to distribute their magazines, and that was ruled illegal because American magazines didn't get the postal subsidy. So you had democratically arrived at pieces of legislation that were very old, that were declared to be illegal retroactively. So in terms of process, that's a really significant issue of how an international governance organism can enter our political space or another country's political space and actually undo democratically done pieces of legislation. And one other example of the problem is that in the Chapter 11 disputes, and these are ones NAFTA allows a company, basically an American company, that has a grievance against some measure. Let's say it's making DDT no longer acceptable as a pesticide. If an American company feels that that's going to impinge on its balance sheet, and there's a case about this going through the court, there is a case that still hasn't been resolved on this, then an international arbitration can be set up to deal with this. And this is a huge change in our legal system, because up to now, if a company didn't like a government measure, it had to go through the Canadian legal system, which with all its warts is still an aspect of our democratic institutions. This new dispute settlement mechanism takes that kind of dispute outside the realm of the Canadian political institutional system, the legal system, and puts it in the hands of international arbitrators, who on the whole are business arbitrators. And it has very real implications for our democratically created legal system. Maybe I should, I've talked enough, I should hand this over to, I was going to say something else, but you need to hear from Stepan, who knows much more than I.
We're planning to go back and forth a few times, and in a fairly informal way. How is the amplification from this mic? To me down here, it sounds very dead, and like we're talking inside a tin can. It's okay? So I'm Stepan Wood, and I just wanted to say a little bit more framing before carrying on where Stephen left off. The book that we wrote is about globalization. It's about Canada's, or more broadly, Canadians' experiences of globalization, in particular in terms of the globalization of law and politics. It arose out of a project we were both involved in with the now defunct Law Commission of Canada. We were both retained as something called a virtual scholar in residence.
Not virtuous.
Not virtuous, although I'm sure we did our best, but virtual scholar in residence to work on a project of theirs on governance beyond borders, so globalization and Canadian law. We had great supporters in the Law Commission, but we soon found out that our interests diverged from what they were interested in, and we ended up saying, why don't we turn this thing into a book? And so in the book, what we do is look at Canadians' experiences and the experiences of the Canadian state of globalization in three arenas. One is the intergovernmental arena, and the next is the arena of the Canadian state itself, the transformation of the Canadian state in the last 25 years or so under contemporary conditions of globalization. And the final arena is looking at instances of sort of forms of governance that are emerging beyond the state or the intergovernmental system. So civil society and business actors as governance actors. A couple days ago, Masroor sent us an email saying, I've read the book, so thank you very much for that. At least we know one person has. And he had a question for us. He said through the book, he wasn't sure whether and to what extent we really answered the question that was on his mind, and I'm sure on many of yours. What is the effect of these free trade agreements on participatory politics and on Canadians' confidence in their elected governments? I would actually pose the question a bit more broadly. What is the effect of globalization on participatory politics and on public confidence in elected governments? Stephen has started to explore that theme. I would only say that the main sort of lesson coming out of our book for that question is that globalization is paradoxical in this connection. So it has had both very clear negative implications for participatory politics and confidence in elected governments, but it also has opened up new possibilities and new avenues for citizen engagement. So Stephen started to talk about some of the deficits of globalization and of a sort of neoliberal economic globalization in particular from a democratic perspective. And I could expand on those, but let me just say that there is a flip side to those deficits as well. Maybe it's looking for a silver lining in a black cloud, or maybe it's trying to make a virtue of necessity. But you can point to some ways in which even the neoliberal free trade architecture has opened up new possibilities. The first is just in the sense of mobilizing resistance. So from the Seattle World Trade Organization ministerial meeting in 1999 forward, there has been a really remarkable transnational mobilization at the grassroots level of concerned citizens and civil society groups. And that has constituted a form of participatory politics of its own, even though I think a marginalized form of participatory politics, not within the, well, some of it has taken place within the formal legislatures, but a lot of it has taken place on the streets as well. Another example would be where governments have taken decisions either in relation to their domestic policies or in relation to their foreign policies that are not popular with their own populations, for instance, for health reasons or environmental reasons. And while there hasn't been, finding avenues domestically has been difficult to effectively challenge these unpopular decisions, the free trade system has in some cases offered ways to challenge those. So I'll give you the example of asbestos. So Canada is one